When people think of popular RPGs, games like the Mass Effect series, the Elder Scrolls, and the Witcher series, as well as a plethora of others, fill their minds. Full-bodied games with an intriguing main quest, attention-grabbing side quests, in-depth characters that have more than meets the eye, and details that fill the world to its brim. Games that are not expected to be released by a small crew of indie German developers for free, done purely as a passion project, where the only pay is the results they can look back on. Before beginning this review, I think it's important to make clear to those of you who have perhaps not yet played or even heard of Enderal exactly what Enderal is. Enderal was created by indie German development team Wereyoi. It's a total conversion mod for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, which was created by Bethesda Game Studios. For those of you who may be lost as to what a total conversion mod is, they are a modification to an existing game that wipes the slate clean and builds upon it an entirely new game. They often feature their own fully fleshed out worlds, new assets, music, NPCs, stories, voice acting, the list goes on. It's this amount of effort and the lack of pay that makes total conversion mods extremely rare, and the graveyard of abandoned projects immense. The fact that Wereyoi has released a total of 4 of these mods, 2 for Morrowind, 1 for Oblivion, and 1 for Skyrim, as well as patching these games well after their releases and even releasing a DLC for Enderal, is enormously impressive and a credit to their talent. What is perhaps most important to note is that Enderal, as well as all of Wereyoi's projects, are completely free of charge as long as you own a copy of the base game required for PC, which in turn means that all personnel who worked on this game worked completely free of charge and only out of passion. Despite being a full total conversion mod, Enderal was a passion project, and as such, the development wasn't covered as completely as a game created by a professional development studio. However, I did interview Enderal project lead Nicholas Samuel, which did give me some insight into the creation process. The experience in the team's previous total conversion projects helped the team out to temper their plans and design a more reasonable and realistic mod.
I think the biggest takeaways were really just about scope and planning, because, you don't see this in the final product, but I think Enderal is probably the closest to what the original concept foresaw. So, for example, Naren was supposed to be a lot bigger, Aquin was supposed to be a lot bigger, and there was so many cuts had to be made just because the planning wasn't good, and because people just tend to incredibly overestimate themselves in non-commercial game development and modding. So I think that definitely helped a lot. Like, if you see a project of this scope through from beginning to end, that's just invaluable.
Enderal was in development for around 5 years, starting in 2011 and finally being released in 2016, and as compared to most other professionally developed games, its development cycle was more dynamic and less than formulaic. The fact that Enderal is a total conversion mod, building off an already existing engine and core features, allowed playtesting from an early stage. While these base functions helped provide a pre-existing foundation to build off of, it was also restricting. It's no secret that part of Skyrim's longevity has been the vibrant modding community that continues to put out quality content to this day. One of the reasons why the modding community is this way is the tools they're given access to. The Creation Kit is a tool created by Bethesda that modders can use to enter into the game and tamper with things from NPCs to weapon stats to world spaces, and it allowed for the Enderal team to realize their vision of their game. However, it does have its restrictions. options. Tampering with the core features is something that modders are unable to do with the creation kit. For example, you can't change the combat from being traditional Skyrim combat to something more along the lines of The Witcher. This creates limitations, some of which did negatively affect the Enderal team and had to be worked around in other manners.
Even Skyrim actually isn't made for creating code conversions neither. Like, we had to kind of hack the game to create a clean master file.
Enderal is free, and a project in which all the creators are unpaid and are donating their time to is going to be fraught with turnover. Enderal was no exception. While developed by a core team of 13, according to the Wereyoi website, in my interview with Nicholas, Enderal did have a plethora of other helpers. Over 100 voice actors for the original release of the game, both English and German, as well as countless aforementioned playtesters, writing assistants, coders, proofreaders, the list goes on. Turnover mainly affected those in the scripting and coding departments, where the effects of it are surprisingly minimally felt. Most of the issues come into view when in combat, where on several occasions enemies failed to attack. Crashes, albeit expected for any mod, were fairly uncommon in my playthrough, and only happened when quicksaving and transitioning to new world spaces. Performance is surprisingly good, despite the number of details and actors placed into the world, excluding a few more lush areas. Most of the writing was done alongside the actual development of the game, in contrast to a professional development studio where quests and stories are written months in advance for review before actual game implementation. Voice acting is of professional quality, with some exceptions.
Hey, you there!
With all of the primary and supporting characters boasting emotive and reactive voices.
Apothecarius by my path. Pleased to meet you. And you are at Sun Coast, in the south of Enderal. Where are you from? But wait, don't tell me. I know that accent. Nerim, isn't it?
There we go. Everything's locked up. At least for the night we should. Wait a second. Who's that?
Just an adventurer on his way. No reason to worry.
No reason to worry? For heck's sake, Finn. How do you know that this guy isn't with the bandits? You said you'd call me if anyone showed up. And now you're standing here, having a chat with him as if this were the bathing house of Ark.
Lo and behold, we are still alive. Now, is there anything else, Carbos?
I've got my eye on you. Touch any of our stuff, and you'll regret it.
This is all to say that for a mod of this scope and ambition, Enderal is surprisingly well-rounded, and while not perfect, is more than enough to immerse you in its complex world. As stated previously, the mechanics of Enderal are more akin to a tweak to Skyrim, but certainly do have their flavor. Enderal aims to make itself feel more like an older RPG, making passive health regeneration non-existent, certain skill checks unpassable if you don't have the high enough skill in the respective stat, and streamlined systems like fast travel disabled. Most of these systems help to immerse the player in the game. Most of them. So first, a quick rundown. The experience system in Enderal has been changed from traditional Skyrim, where in Skyrim you gain specific experience and a skill by using that skill. For example, hitting an enemy with a sword, war axe, or mace would grant one-handed experience. In Enderal, experience is gained through, well, experience.
Of course, there's a lot, like the whole character progression is different. Like, we kicked the learning by doing thing and reintroduce experience points.
Exploring, defeating enemies, finishing quests, picking locks, I could continue. Each of these events grants the player experience points. Similar to most RPG systems, the player must reach a certain amount of experience points before being able to level up, with the amount required growing as the player reaches a higher level. Once leveled up, the player is greeted with a dialogue box that asks them to increase either their health, mana, or stamina, similar to Skyrim, and they are granted one memory point. After increasing one of their 3 main stats, the player can activate their meditate power and are transported to a new world space where they can interact with a selection of memory stones. These stones act as a physical manifestation of the perk trees from Skyrim, where each of the stones corresponds to a specific skill or playstyle, whether it be an armor-clad combatant, a sneaky sniper, or a conniving conjurer. With whatever playstyle the player prefers, memories or perks can be taken from any of the stones after any level, so the player isn't restricted in their playstyle. Each of these memories cost 1 memory point to unlock, and each acts as a small boost to the player's prowess with a certain style of combat. But what about your actual skills? While the aforementioned leveling system is mostly a reskinned system from Skyrim with a couple of changes, it doesn't affect any actual player's skills. Selecting new memories from the memory stone doesn't boost any correlating skills, and using your skills in combat doesn't boost them either. So what gives? Well, upon leveling up, the player will receive more than just the memory point to spend on memories. The player also receives a small amount of crafting and learning points. Each of these types of points is spent to read learning books. These learning books have several different tiers to them: apprentice, adept, expert, and master, each of which corresponds to a skill level bracket going up to 100 in intervals of 25. These books raise the player's skill up to a certain level, upon which reaching books of a previous tier cannot raise the skill any higher. For example, apprentice books can raise a skill to 25, but cannot raise a skill above 25. However, adept, expert, and master books can all be used to raise a skill to 25 as well. So what's the difference between crafting and learning points? Well, learning points are spent on books that deal with players' combat skills: one-handed, heavy and light armor, elementalism, stealth, etc., etc. And crafting points are spent on books that deal with players' crafting skills: speechcraft, smithing, enchanting, lockpicking, etc. However, there is an inherent flaw in this system. How does the player acquire these books? Well, the most simple answer would be to buy the learning books from special merchants who have a wide variety of books to choose from. However, this method is extremely costly, and should a player not have the funds, their only other options are to either steal, explore, or complete quests, hoping a book's a reward. Stealing a book has its obvious consequences if you get caught, but even finding a large quantity of these books to steal would be a challenge. Exploring out in the wild for books leads many players up short, as learning books are semi-uncommon loot. In my playthrough, albeit I just played through the main quest, I found myself with a tremendous amount of crafting and learning points at the end, so much so that I would read learning books even if they didn't apply to my character's build. This problem is compounded by the fact that the learning books a character finds through exploration do not scale with the character's level. In an email sent to me by Nicholas answering a question about level-scaled loot, this is the response I got. No, the loot is hard-coded, so to speak. Smiley face. Hard-coded, huh? Sounds like a good time. Meet for dinner? Winky face. Getting back on track, what this means is that a level 10 character who may have all his skills in the 50s after grinding will still find apprentice level books. This presents an inherent problem that now the player cannot reliably explore for new books to advance skills, and now must go into the shops to buy more books or cross their fingers to find more. While this might not sound like too much of an issue, it now presents a considerable expense for a player to simply be able to use their playstyle more effectively. This may stand in the way of acquiring new materials, armor, or weapons, which could hamper a player in combat. It's hard for a total conversion mod to innovate new ways of performing key base functions from its base materials. This comes into particular effect when dealing with as an important system to an RPG as combat. However, while the combat in Enderal feels like Skyrim, with basic archery being identical to basic archery in Skyrim, this is just the look of combat. How it looks to swing a sword, fire an arrow, and ignite a spell. Enemy AI packages have been tweaked, health regeneration has been completely nixed, with foods only recovering health out of combat, spells, sleeping, ingredients, and potions being the only viable options for health recovery.
This is all very heavily inspired by, I guess, old RPGs, which might be a bit harder, but at the same time, at least that's how we felt, a lot more rewarding. I think combat-wise, then the new talents and the new class system and, the whole survival aspect with health doesn't regenerate if you haven't eaten and stuff, I think those were like the biggest gameplay changes that affected combat.
Consumption of potions is also now limited, similarly to the potion toxicity in the Witcher games. One of the subplot points, the arcane fever, a disease that affects all magic users, including the character, also has to be regulated with a new potion called ambrosia. The fever can be raised in differing percentages through actions like standing in areas with high magical content, or blue rocks, using spells, and, as mentioned before, drinking potions. The arcane fever reduces the player's skill and attributes as it progresses in severity, and once reaching 100%, kills the player. It also makes Enderal quite a bit more difficult, and forced me to rely on the quick save button not only to protect against crashes, but also repeated deaths. Though this is not a complaint. Combat, for what it is in Enderal, is an improvement in my eyes from Skyrim. Enemy AI packages were tweaked, so the archers and mages will stay back, crouching for cover behind rocks, and the fighters and rogues will engage you in ferocious frontline combat. This makes archers and mages incredibly dangerous, giving them the ability to pick you off from range, while the enemy fighters quickly drop your health with heavy-handed attacks. Ducking behind walls, using line of sight to your advantage, and dodging is all now necessary to combat in Enderal. Rather than just rush headlong into a fight like in Skyrim, it's now required of the player to give just a little forethought before the battle, though this is only when the AI works. On occasion while playing, most notably on some story climax moments, enemies would simply refuse to attack me, running up in front of my character only to stand there and let themselves get battered. To elegantly segue into my next topic of magic in Enderal, like the rest of combat, is similar to Skyrim, however it does have its differences. Enderal introduces 5 completely new schools of magic, replacing the vanilla 5. Each of these schools contains a spell with their own effects, both visual and technical, and have a distinct feeling from each other. The most interesting in my opinion is Entropy. While most schools use your mana pool to cast, Entropy takes directly from the player's health to cast the spells. Entropy also expands on the Conjuration school from Skyrim, going past the ability to call creatures from the dead, and adds its own unique damaging spells, notable by its sickly colored green lightning. This wonderfully ties into the lore of the game, in which Entropy is seen as a forbidden school of magic, and while finding the tomes that contain these legendary spells is maybe enough for some players to explore, it's sometimes the actual world that pushes exploration.
Visually, we definitely wanted to distance ourselves from the rather, monotonous Skyrim environment, which is beautiful, but still, especially to me as somebody who's not so fond of, like the northern biomes, or at least if it's just that, we really wanted to, create some diversity. So we have a lot of different landscapes. We have forests, we have deserts, we have mountains, we have snowy mountains, and we have, these completely magical, fantasy-ish environments such as the Crystal Forest, and so on and so forth. So the goal was to create more diversity.
Detail in level design falls into either two ends of a spectrum, either greatly lacking, with reused assets looking copy and pasted with minor variances and chest-high walls, or finely detailed with great care taken to make each location feel unique, or at least lived in. The level design within Enderal falls into the latter category. The incredible amount of detail the team of level designers put into these worlds is admirable, whether it's small touches such as posters and the small amounts of ice on a bridge next to a waterfall on top of a snowy mountain, or something large such as how the player moves through a dungeon, using verticality and line of sight to give the player a preview of where they will end up as they progress. All of it fits into the world seamlessly and helps create a sense of life. The continent of Enderal itself is smaller than Skyrim's, but intelligently breaks its horizons up with mountains and valleys, creating a much larger feel to the landscape. The multitude of biomes, from a desert to woodland to mountains to even a jungle, all have their own color palettes. Transitions between these biomes feel at least somewhat natural, and with bordering environments taken into account. The life extends into the villages and the only city and capital of Enderal, Ark. In comparison to the vanilla Skyrim cities, if they can even be called that, Ark truly feels like a sprawling landscape of its own. Dense streets block the player's view, as well as having the city's districts broken up into several different world spaces, and keeping an entire city below Ark and giving players a unique fast travel system within the city is example enough of some of the ingenious ideas on how Ark is made to feel like a real city. The streets within Ark, as aforementioned, are dense with buildings, posters, signs, flora, and clutter. Generic NPCs roam by day, going from building to building, some drunks wobbling out of the inn, street performers playing their song and dancing with animations that rival Commander Shepard's. In a small stroke of genius by the development team, a fast travel system was created to help the players move quickly around this massive city. Activating any signpost brings up a dialogue box that will lead the players to any of the districts of the city. This system also has the added benefit of making the city feel larger than it is, as it is the only fast travel system in the entire game, outside of riding a giant winged spider goat thing. The environmental storytelling that appears outside of the cities and towns can range from a semi-normal corpse lying face first in the road, with a trail of blood leading you into the woods, to the inextricably weird, like skeletons conversing on rocks who assumedly drowned in high tide.
We wanted to make sure that the world strongly incentivizes exploration. So we achieved that by, really handcrafting every single corner of the game world, every dungeon. And we tried to place, points of interest or rewards and buried treasure and stuff like that wherever we could. That's how we approached designing the environment.
Music is something that can truly make or break a game for me when it comes to the effectiveness of immersion and storytelling, and for Enderal, the music elevates it to the next level. The team's extensive list of composers, including, apologies for butchering any of your names, Marvin Kopp, Nicholas Samuel, Simon Otenrieth, Andreas Makuzev, and Frank Bartholomew, are extremely talented. Inspiration from the Elder Scrolls composer Jeremy Soule can be heard, or rather felt, when listening to the soundtracks. The surprising variety in themes, giving bosses their own themes, songs that punctuate story moments, all help to define Enderal's emotional experience. Even listening to the soundtrack now as I write this script, hearing the calming rise and fall of Deceptive Peace raise goosebumps. While songs like Prophet elevate the stakes, making use of mixed strings and horns and drums to match the drama of combat. However, the true works of art are the bard's songs. Songs like The Winter Sky and The Wayward Wanderer are not only beautifully sung and composed, the subtle storytelling woven into each and every one of them adds to the immersion of the game. The songs are also sung by those with simply angelic vocals, with singers like Lara Loft, who you're hearing now.
100 men they were, as they set out to fight for their country's banner in distant foreign lands. He bid her farewell, a love still young and green. She thought she'd soon be in his arms again. He told her, await my safe return, trust in this, last promise and stand firm. Once moonlight shines red onto the seas, we shall all return in victory. There marched off blue banners in the sky, and teardrops were running from her eyes. Yet she thought, if only I believe, time will bring him safely back to me. When the red moon casts its light, his ghost travels through the night, through the forest on wind's wings, until he reaches the old hill. There she kneels before his grave, where their love had once been born, and he caresses her.
To speak in comparison to Skyrim, the dialogues and scenes that play on Enderal blow Skyrim out of the water. Dialogue is one of Enderal's strongest points, and for good reason. To write dialogue to sound human, much less fit a certain character's personality, is extraordinarily difficult.
Method is always to try to make characters as authentic as possible. So obviously I tried to draw a lot of inspiration from people I knew. And whenever I write like a line of dialogue, even if it has to, fulfill a purpose, like say start a quest, I rewrite it 10 times to make sure it sounds like something an actual person would say. And I think one of the reasons why players consider them to feel so authentic is because of that. So for me, it's always about authenticity. And outside of that, it's usually about a theme, and it's a bit like it's like a patchwork thing. Like you take real life experiences, real life people, real life conversations you've had, and then you kind of mix it with like a philosophical or psychological concept. Or it doesn't even have to be that. It's just like this idea for the lack of a better word, like this thing which they are ultimately about, and then all that together kind of creates the character.
Though Enderal goes past just having characters having unique and consistent personalities that are reflected within their lines, voiced by incredibly talented voice actors. The scenes designed around these conversations also lend themselves to the storytelling. Environmental hints or supporting generic actors help portray the character's mindset, events both past and present, and sets the atmosphere of the conversation. Animations are played alongside dialogue, and breaks taken in lines for characters to move from position to position feel natural and realistic.
I wish I knew. What I do know, though, is that the first memory I have is of waking up in the middle of some village. It was dark, and I felt dizzy and, I don't know, empty? That's probably the best way to describe it. I eventually found the strength to get up and look around, and, well, that's when I realized what was actually going on around me. The entire village. It had been destroyed. There were corpses everywhere. Men, women, children, and the houses had been crushed as if some mad god had rampaged through the streets there. And it had all just happened hours before because the destruction was still fresh. Whatever it was, I didn't have much time to think about it. As soon as I got up, I saw 3 riders coming through the smoke. One of them got off his horse, ran towards one of the corpses, and started screaming something in my direction. Then I felt a blow on the back of my head, and I lost consciousness. By the name of the sun, it's strange to talk about it like this. It's been so long, but the memory feels as if it had happened yesterday.
While most of the time these small cutscenes are escapable, meaning the player can move away at any time, sometimes these are inescapable. These inescapable cutscenes can often feel jagged, as suddenly you lose control of your character while you're put on rails and slid into position. Players can be teleported, dialogue can stop suddenly, leaving awkward silences, and the player is left without a means to attempt escape. This creates a feeling of loss of control, especially when put into a game like Enderal. Being based in the Skyrim engine, Enderal is designed as an open-world sandbox RPG, albeit with a much greater focus on story, and these inescapable cutscenes take place, it feels unnatural. One reviewer on a Steam page put it well. For me, it's a mix between Bethesda's open-world design and BioWare's story. For any who have played KOTOR or Mass Effect, when it comes to dialogue, a direct comparison between Enderal and these types of games can be made. While not exactly having as large of branching dialogue trees as either of the aforementioned games, contextual dialogue options are given, with the option to advance the story having an arrow next to it. Enderal also includes a reputation system between characters, with characters approving and disapproving of certain replies and dialogue options. The reputation system mostly just affects characters' responses and whether the character is interested in romance, though it does have outside implications in other side quests. To wrap all my thoughts into a neat package regarding Enderal's gameplay, it's a strangely different Skyrim. That may seem vague, and it is, as I'm sick while revising the script, and I can't be bothered to phrase it better, but it's true. Enderal inevitably looks like Skyrim, and that's impossible for the team to overcome. Regardless of what they do, Enderal is a mod of Skyrim. However, Enderal has its own feel, and every element of the game makes sure you know that. The completely new land transports you away from the familiar lands of Skyrim, with a level designed to encourage exploration. The leveling and combat system tweaks, changes, and enhances Enderal's character progression, and the dialogue and music enhance the inhabitants and the sounds of the story. Though, that is only one half of the game, and probably the lesser spoken about. The other half is the story.